Nich Pachwai in Nishwanisha Sisi Hoffman, Washnash Umatilla, Nichawe Knik Nashwa. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Cece Hoffman. I am from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and I recently started working at Na'ah Illahee Fund as our Environmental Justice Coordinator Assistant. For those who are a little less familiar with Na'ah Illahee Fund, we are an Indigenous women-led organization that centers our work on Indigenous resurgence in many different ways. And this year, we are holding our annual Blue Jay Festival online. And throughout the next 5 days, we'll be including community members and bringing them in to share very powerful stories, teachings, and conversations. We really believe that right now, especially, it's important to continue to find ways to come together, lift each other up, and learn from one another. So thank you all so much for joining us today. For this segment, we are going to be within the realm of food sovereignty. And as many of you may know, as Native peoples, our relationships with the land, water, and non-human relatives have always been really important parts of our lifeways. And despite the disconnect that settler colonialism attempts to create, there are many ways that we are continuing to maintain those relationships. So for today, we are going to be showing a couple short videos made by Indigenous folks within our communities, and they'll be doing some demonstrations of some ways in which they're maintaining those practices, specifically around food preparation and preservation. The first video has been created by Mariana Harvey. She'll be sharing a recipe with us for Salish pemmican. And a little bit about Mariana before diving into the video is that she has spent the last 6 years working to promote culturally based leadership initiatives for Native youth within the Northwest and nationally through Native Youth Leadership Alliance. She is deeply passionate about Native foods and medicines and is the Wild Foods and Medicines Program Coordinator at GRuB. She is an Isla, a mother, an artist, and a citizen of the Yakama Nation. So without further ado, we'll play Mariana's video.
Mariana Harvey, Yakama Connect. Good day. My name is Mariana Harvey. I'm a citizen of the Yakama Nation, and I'm here to share a recipe with you all for the Blue Jay event from Na'ah Illahee Fund. I love Na'ah Illahee Fund. You all do so much amazing work. I personally benefited from this work, and I'm proud to be in partnership with Na'ah Illahee Fund. I work at GRuB, known as Garden Raised Bounty, in their Wild Foods and Medicines program, and I get to work with Na'ah Illahee Fund on our 10 Gather Grow curriculum. And the recipe I'm sharing today, I learned from Vanessa Cooper, who's a Lummi tribal member, and it's called Salish pemmican. And pemmican is a traditional food that many tribal communities have used as a nutrient-dense food. So it's traditionally like a dried meat, a dried nut, or dried berries with some fat. And this recipe has some of that Salish flair, some of that Northwest flair, as we'll be using hazelnuts and blueberries and cranberries. And I chose this recipe because these are all things you could do this recipe by just going to the grocery store and finding some dried meat, dried nut berry, and a nut butter. And so sometimes it's really hard to have access to our traditional foods, our indigenous foods, and it's a good reminder that some of them, versions of our native foods, can be found on our grocery store shelves, and that maybe it brings that connection to maybe the next time you make this recipe, you'll have gathered some of those huckleberries from the mountain and dried them and put that in your pemmican, or got some jerky from one of your relatives from one of their hunting trips. But it's also nice just to find those nutrient-dense foods that we can adapt from our grocery store shelves and bring them into our homes. So this recipe I'm going to be sharing. I'll also share a photo of the recipe, or just share that with Na'ah Illahee Fund so they can share the actual recipe. But it's also found here in this curriculum that we just launched called Plant Teachings for Growing Social Emotional Skills. This was a partnership with Garden Raised Bounty and Northwest Indian Treatment Center, and we've been hosting several teacher trainings with this curriculum. And here's the recipe for seedless pemmican as one of many recipes and teachings in here. You can find more about this and how to access this at GoodGrub.org. We'll have it available on our website soon. But back to the recipe. So it's a really simple thing. Like I said, you just need a cup of dried meat. I have buffalo jerky, and buffalo are, and any of our wild game like deer or elk or moose, and salmon. Dried salmon could also be used in this recipe. They're just so much more nutrient dense and have so much more medicine than if you're just buying some cows. And you can find buffalo jerky often at different stores. So if you don't have that relative that might have some deer jerky or elk jerky on hand, this is one that you could also find. And you can also just use some good quality beef jerky as well. So I take the 1 cup, this is already measured, of the buffalo jerky, and I chopped it up a little bit. I have a few more pieces to chop up. They're already kind of chopped up, but it just makes it easier for it to go in your blender, or I'm using a food processor. And then I already have pre-measured my dried blueberries and cranberries. And I like to find ones that don't have added sugar, or oftentimes you'll see with cranberry, because they're so tart, some people, you'll find it like sweetened with apple juice. So I like to find that, because I like to give this to my son, who's almost 2, and this is just a really good nutrient dense food for him. That's an easy snack on the go. So I'm going to put this in the food processor, and here's my cup of raw hazelnuts. And again, these aren't the native beaked hazelnut. The beaked hazelnut is the native hazelnut to this region. But hazelnut trees, like the European variety, grows really well in the Northwest. So there's a lot of hazelnut. Like this is raw Oregon hazelnut that I bought at Trader Joe's, pretty affordable. Raw nuts are have a little bit more nutrients in them than when after they're roasted or dried, even though the roasting gives like a really different flavor that you might enjoy. It's either or. You might, I just shoot for the raw nut. And you could also use seeds if you have an allergy. You could take, whatever type of seed, pumpkin seed, sesame seed, sunflower seed, probably not sesame seed, and replace the nuts. So I'm going to blend this up first before I put the meat in the nut butter. And I'm actually going to put the nut butter in here. So then if you use a half a cup of nut butter, and again, this could be seed butter, this is peanut butter, but I could have got hazelnut butter, almond butter, any kind of butter could do. So I'm going to put this in there. love food processors. I got this for Christmas a few years ago, and it's like my favorite. And I don't remember if I mentioned this, but you can also do this in a blender. The first time I saw Vanessa do this, she did it in a blender, and I was like, it's a good blender, but it was just like a regular blender. Okay, so now I'm gonna add the buffalo jerky. This is a cup, so it's 1 cup jerky, 1 cup nuts, 1 cup dried fruit, so 1 cup dried meat, dried nut, dried fruit, and then 1/2 cup of your nut butter, seed butter. Now I'm gonna mix this up. Okay, so what we're wanting is for it to be like that you can just kind of mash it together. So I'm going to test it out. So far, it's pretty easy. Oh, I forgot I had one more ingredient. I'm going to add it. Anyways, so the other thing that is not actually in the recipe that I'll share, but I've heard from my dear friend Elise, and she's also one of my teachers, is that you could add nettle powder in here. So you could when I say nettle powder, I like actually go and take my like dried nettles. That these are ones that I dried myself, but you can also the ones that you go and buy in the store. If you go to a herb store, just buy dried nettles. You can put it in your coffee grinder. So I keep a second grinder that's just for herbs, and then I can because coffee's so strong and I love coffee. There's 2 grinders. So my spice grinder, I put it in there until it's a powder, and you can use that powder like how you would use any other spice like cinnamon, and just use it as that flavoring, and it gives like that much more of a nutrient medicinal dense treat for whoever gets to enjoy these. So what I have a really special already powdered green from Wild Green Sovereignty. They yeah, this is like a bunch of amazing, you can find them on Instagram. Wild Green Sovereignty, and this is several different wild plants. So there's nettle and fireweed and all kinds of things. And so for the recipe, for all the like 1 cups and 1/2 cup of nuts and berries, I would put about 1 tablespoon of this green. Add the greens in here. I meant to add that in the beginning. So we'll see how it does. So again, you can kind of share what it looks like in here. It's just chopped up. It looks really, I don't even know the proper culinary way to say it, but it's all small. It's all small little bits and pieces. And what we want is for it to just kind of to stick together when you start rolling it, because what we're really making is these little pemmican balls. And I like to make my different sizes. Like again, I have a little one, and so I'll make like a little one size, and and I might want one that's a little bit bigger, but they're so packed that I often don't want them too big, because they can be really satiating and fill you up pretty fast, which is my favorite because I'm still breastfeeding my son, and so I'm still like always hungry, and I always want those snacks, just easy, fast to fill me up. So just mash it up again and roll it back into a ball. And then the last little step that you could do is I like to roll it in some sesame seeds, and it just makes it look really pretty. I've offered these at different like food events, and I've also done this too as like a demo with folks, and it's really fun. Like it's just fun to always like bring in our indigenous foods. Like I've done this at like hotel conference rooms with Native youth, and for them to like to bring in your foods, and especially if you're traveling, if you travel to a conference when that's normal again, to just bring all these dried ingredients that are really easy to travel with. So this is what it would look like. Your salish pemmican ball. And again, you can, experiment with different sizes, and it's so adaptable. You don't have to add the greens in there. You can see what tastes and flavors your family might like. And also sometimes with the jerkies that you might find, some might be smoked or have lots of flavors in them, and maybe you want to find some like really good wind-dried jerky that doesn't have all the extra spices in them. And and this will stay in a cool, dark place for several months since it's all dried ingredients. I just like to keep mine in the fridge because it just makes it seem safer for longer, especially because I'll be sharing it with my little one. And thanks for watching. I hope you all try the Salish pemmican, and thank you again.
Thank you so much for creating and sharing this piece with us, Mariana. I'm very excited to try this new recipe, and I think that it's a really strong example of how we're able to adapt to our environments and still be connected to our native foods while also living in a modern context. And I also really appreciate how, as an Ifla, as a mother, you show us how we can do this not only for ourselves, but for the health of our families and for future generations. And now we'll go into showing our last video, which was put together by Mackenzie Grinnell, and it'll take us through the process of harvesting black moss and making it into a pudding. A little bit about Mackenzie before showing the video is that he is a Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe citizen from the Prince family. He received his undergraduate degree in cultural perspectives on conflict from Western Washington University, Fairhaven College. And before moving home and working as the traditional foods program assistant at Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe, he trained as he trained university students in decolonized activism, and he has now taken his passion for social and environmental activism and turned the preservation and revitalization of traditional food practices in his own community. So now we will show Mackenzie's video.
My name is Austin. My English name is Mackenzie Grinnell. I'm from the Prince family at Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe and the G family from the Na'ah Nation. Today I'm going to be making black moss pudding. I am heading up the mountain to go get some black moss to make black moss pudding. As you can see, it's snowing and very cold. Usually I'd have gone by now before the snow comes, but I forgot. So now I'm going up in the snow. So sometimes, you can only find black moss at the top of mountains. So next year I'll remember to go earlier. But this is my day to get some black moss, make black moss pudding for our first food ceremony. So I found the first black moss. I'm not very far into the trail. It's not very much, so hopefully we can find some before the top of the mountain. But this is what we're looking for right here. And we're going to need about a big paper bag full. So one little pinch down, 1,000 to go. The trail's going downhill, and we want to go uphill. But sometimes you got to go down first to go up. Well, we're still going up the mountain, but when you go harvesting, you always have to look for things you weren't looking for. So I found some Na'ah, which is this plant right here under the snow, which makes a really good tea, which, I'll have to tell you later of exactly what it does. But how you harvest this is you take the bottom leaves. So there's these top leaves right here. You want to leave those so it'll keep growing. You want to take the ones at the bottom. And this tea is a really strong medicine. And it's so strong that when you make tea out of it, you can make tea out of it a few times instead of just once, like other plants like nettle or something like that. So I'm going to harvest some of this, and might harvest some as I keep hiking up the mountain on the way to get black moss to make pudding. When you're harvesting this plant, it's this one, you don't want to harvest a lot. So from this patch, it's about, the size of a bed. I got one handful. But I've seen a bunch of patches so far, so I'm just going to keep stopping. When I take a break, another handful, and that will make sure that these plants right here will keep growing next year, and we can come back and harvest more. But you always don't want to harvest too much, so I'm going to be giving this away to some elders, making some tea out for myself. I might add some to some tea mixes, but I want to make good use of it. So we couldn't make it to the top of the mountain because the snow was getting a little too deep and the trail was hard to find. So I'm heading back down. I only got about a couple handfuls of black moss and then the Pipsissewa or Princess tea. So we're gonna head back down and make black moss pudding out of what we got. So this is how much black moss that we got. It's about 2 this size, most of it was got packed. And this will make about a little bowl of black moss pudding, and you don't need a ton. For our first food ceremony, each person is only getting a little taste of it. And I have some more black moss pudding that I already have going, so I'm just going to kind of add them all together. The first thing you want to do is clean the black moss because it was up in the trees. It had sticks and twigs, pieces of bark, sap in it. You want to try and get as much of that as you can get out. You can leave little chunks in. I mean, whatever you miss, you can find later when it floats to the top when you're making the pudding. Because the process, you put it in water and you boil it for 3 days. And so anything you miss will come out then, but you want to try to make it as clean as possible so you won't have as much work to do later when everything's wet and hot and you don't want to do that. So what is black moss pudding? I probably should have started out by talking about that, but as I clean, I guess I can tell you what that is. It's a pudding made out of this black moss, and it's used in different ceremonies, and it's more of a ceremonial food. I don't know a ton about it. I'm still learning, and that's something that we can all do, right? We can still make this food while we're still learning. We can still do something and learn about it at the same time. And so that's what I'm doing. I learned from a couple of elders in the S'Klallam Tribe. Kimberly Miller taught me how to make black moss, and I also learned from some other mentors and some of my elders here at Jamestown. They remember eating this, but they don't remember the process of making it. So so that's been a little hard to kind of piece together these different things, right? But that's what we need to do is bring back our traditional foods, is find these little nuggets of information, find these elders that have this wisdom to pass down, and also ask other elders to see what they remember. So last year was the first time I made black moss, and it wasn't the best, but I'm gonna do it again, and I know I did it wrong. I didn't cook it long enough, but everyone tried it and they really enjoyed it, which was great. I can ask my elders that have had it but didn't know how to make it. They're like, oh, this tastes really good. It was really reminiscent for them, and it brought up all of these really good memories of eating black moss pudding. So I'm going to make it this year. I'm going to try to make it better, which for me was cooking it longer. Black moss pudding, you cook for 2 to 3 days, and I think I just barely made the 2-day mark last year. So this year I'm going to do the full 3 days. So something that I really love about processing things like this is that it reminds me of my grandma when we would sit down, or she would sit me down when I was younger, and I would help her process cedar and different grasses and things like that. I would help, prepare salmon, but it would always kind of be sitting around like this, processing things. It doesn't take a ton of concentration to do it, but it allows you to chat with people, to hear stories and tell stories and catch up with people. And that's what I really loved about doing things like this, and that's why I love this kind of work and this kind of work for our people, for our nutrition, but it's also this thing that for our soul and our being, because we get to spend this time with our elders, we get to spend this time with ourselves, being self-reflective, working on our stories and telling stories and just being who we are and having that quiet moment of reflection too. Okay, now that we're all done with the processing and cleaning of the black moss, we're going to be putting it into a pot and adding water. It's not really a scientific amount of water. You just add a lot of water. You want to get completely submerged. And I always add a little bit extra because when you're cooking it for 3 days, like I've said, and the water's going to be boiling out, and you're going to have to keep adding water. So I always, in the beginning, I've done it once. I add a lot of water because then I won't have to be adding more water so many times. But like I was saying, there's little chunks that are floating to the surface right now. So I'm pulling those out. So now that there is enough water, so I added 2 big handfuls of black moss, and then I think 12 cups of water, give or take. And then as it keeps going, add less and less water as it gets down to the end of the cooking. But I put it on the stove, I put it up high just to get it heated up, and then once it's hot, you turn it down to low, and then just let it simmer and steam. And that's what cooks it. And so what's happening right now as you cook it, it's breaking down the cell walls of black moss. So if you can feel it, it feels like a moss. It feels like the usnia, which is that big yellow stuff that hangs from trees, which you might have seen more often. It feels just like that, maybe a little bit more. Well, it grows in bigger clumps, so it's just more hairy. And so as you're cooking it, it just starts to break down, and it breaks down, it starts turning gooey, and eventually it'll turn into more of like a soup, and then it'll turn more goopy, and you keep adding water, and you want to do that for 3 days, because after a while it'll kind of start breaking down, but it still has those little chunks in it. So you want to keep cooking it until all those chunks have kind of dissolved into the water. And also, during this whole time, what you're just watching a pot boil. Is this the most exciting video you've ever seen? I think so. I thought so I made some popcorn to watch it. And you just let this on your stove for 3 days. Kimberly Miller, who told me how to make this, their whole family made it. Her father all have stories of in the middle of the night, they would wake up and stir it, but they would leave it simmering like this for days and days and days. And that's what I'll be doing for the next few days of making this. And so how did we make this traditionally? It was in a bentwood box like this. And you would put the black moss in there, and you would have hot rocks in there like this. You would take those out every once in a while, you would heat them back up in a fire, and you would put them back into the bentwood box with the black moss and the water. You would keep adding water just like in a pot, but it's just a little bit longer process by heating up the rocks rather than just turning on the stove. And these bentwood boxes aren't these perfect boxes that you see I was pointing there. The joints kind of have a little gunk in it, and so that I use clay and pitch to fill in the cracks. That if there's any cracks in it, you also want to soak your bentwood box in water, kind of swell up the wood, and it'll fill in the holes. And so I guess this isn't a bentwood box cooking class, but that's how you do it traditionally. Put these rocks in, them out. If it leaks, fill the cracks with mud, whatever you got that you want to eat. Using a clay is what's best. I use a pitch, and my whole soup tasted like a tree when it's supposed to taste like salmon. So use clay. That's what I learned. Yeah, and all of these things, we're all learning. Like when I first started, I started using these really small rocks like this. But you really want to use a big rock because it holds a lot of heat even in a fire. And so that, like, a pretty good fist-sized rock. This rock is, maybe you can use it, but once you get any smaller than that, they don't hold a lot of heat. They push their heat into the soup really fast. This rock is pretty good size, but I would say the biggest one here is what you kind of want to aim for. And these rocks are, you see kind of holes, they're black. They're like these lava rocks, and those can go in a fire and not break. So those ones you want to use. I guess back to black moss, you want to keep stirring, make sure it doesn't burn to the bottom of the pan. I think by now I've turned down the heat, it's just simmering. Not much has happened. The water's got a little brown. Watching water boil, I don't know, pretty fun. Yeah. So you want to make sure you stir it every so often. Once it starts getting more juicy, you want to stir it more. You want to turn down the heat a little bit more. In this back pot, I've had this going for about 2 days now. See how goopy it's getting. And it's all, you can't even really see the hair, very mossy in it. It's all kind of dissolved, but it's kind of lumpy, so that's when it needs to go for another day. I always try to wash off my spoon, and since I have a hot pot of black moss pudding, I just swish around in there. So this black moss, once it's dried onto something metal, it's the hardest thing to clean up. So just clean up after yourselves when you're making this. Yep, still watching it boil. So you see the water's a little brown. It hasn't really started to dissolve yet. But going back to the other one, you can see that kind of viscosity. And since the last time I showed this, it's probably been about 2 hours. Goopy. Even this one, I'll probably cook for another day. I'll add probably as much pudding there, or black moss pudding there is in that. I'll probably add that much water and boil it down if I can. And see how it's kind of creamy. Yeah, so just keep boiling. Just keep boiling. Okay, so it still needs some time to cook. It looks like these little granule things on the side. But I'm gonna do a little test match, and just like any other pudding or jello, you put it into a little dish and then you let it cool off, and that's when it really firms up. And so I'm gonna put a little in this dish, put it in the fridge, put it in the fridge, and see what it turns out like. Okay, it looks pretty good. Let's try cut into it. And it's not completely solid, but that's kind of the consistency. Maybe a little more jelly-like. Let's see what it tastes like. Okay. Thank you for watching this about how to make black make some of our traditional foods, especially ceremonial foods that aren't used a lot. But now it's your turn to go out and then talk to your elders and learn from a few different elders, as I talked about, and then I went and talked to my elders too. They don't remember how to make it, so I was able to kind of piece together little things from here and there, and a lot from the Yakama tribe, and then a couple elders from my family too. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you can get out and make some.
Great, thank you, Mackenzie, for also sharing that. I really appreciated being able to see how like the goofiness in your personality came out while shooting it too. I also really want to try this recipe, and watching the video inspired me to learn more about the traditional methods in which my communities prepared food too. So yeah, thank you both so much again for creating these. These knowledges are very powerful, and being able to connect and learn in these ways feels very important, especially right now amongst this pandemic. And we'll be sure to post these videos and also the recipes from both Mariana and Mackenzie's videos on our social media pages. So be sure to check them out if you want to try them. And also on our pages, you can find the details for the events for the rest of the week that will be going on for our Blue Jay Festival. We have some really amazing storytellers and conversations that will be coming up. So yeah, check them out. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And we really look forward and are excited to share with you for the rest of the week.